Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective.
Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 26th May 2022. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. But before we start our discussion, we have a few announcements to make. So let us go through these announcements and then let us go through the important news articles of today's newspaper. Before we start today's DNS, I have a very important announcement to make. Now you all understand that optional is a very important part of your preparation. And as such, RAU'S IAS is conducting optional orientation session at its old Rajendra Nagar Center as well as in live online format. And these optional orientation sessions are free counseling sessions that are scheduled between 24th to 27th May. Accordingly, tomorrow there will be geography and anthropology counseling sessions. So the geography optional orientation session will be taken by our faculty Vineet Thaplu sir on 27th May from 3:30 onwards, and the optional orientation related to anthropology will be taken by our faculty Dr. C.P. Kaushik from 6 p.m. onwards at the old Rajendra Nagar campus. So you can visit the center at the old Rajendra Nagar to attend these counseling sessions, and you can also attend them in an online format. Prelims is just 10 days away. So before the real prelims examination, to have a feel of the kind of paper that you are going to face in the real prelims examination, appear in the Pre-Parikshan 4 test, which is a free all India mock test. And this test has been scheduled from 27th of May till 29th of May, and the result for the same will be declared on 30th May next day, and you can understand your standing amongst the most serious aspirants at an all India level. Also, you can have a feel of how the question paper is going to look like in the real prelims examination. Now in our weekly answer writing practice series, the question for this week is highlight the contributions of Raja Ram Mohan Roy in bringing social reforms during 19th century, and you have to write the answer in 150 words, and this question is for 10 marks. You can post your answers on the ELEARN platform in the comment section of this particular question. If you submit your answers before Saturday, they will be evaluated. This article on page number 5 reads that the Palestine issue doesn't diminish India-Israel relations, and the ties between the two countries are improving in fields like agriculture, defense and cybersecurity, and this has been said by the Consul General of Israel in one of the interviews in Bangalore. Now in this line, there is a background to India-Israel relations, and this background is essentially arising out of the Palestine-Israel conflict. In this line, India's stand on the conflict of Israel and Palestine has changed ever since the Second World War till today. And that is why the background in which the India-Israel relations have shaped up is important for us. Now you might all be aware that Israel was carved out of the Palestinian territory after the United Nations partition plan. And this Israel was formulated or created as a Jewish state because of the atrocities that the Jews faced during the Second World War at the hands of Nazi Germany. In this line, when the Jewish state of Israel was created in the Palestinian territory, which was backed by the United Nations, it was opposed by the Arab countries which were in support of Palestine as an independent state. So this conflict between Israel and Palestine then became a conflict between Israel and the Arab countries, including some of the surrounding countries of the Israel-Palestine region. And that is why various Arab countries have fought wars with Israel in the past, including the War of 1967, the 1973, and the Yom Kippur War, etc. So the Israel-Palestine conflict then became a conflict between the Arab countries and the Israel. However, of late, since the Abraham Accords, the relations between Israel and the Arab countries are normalizing, and accordingly, there is also an opportunity for India to improve the relations with Israel, Arab, and all these countries, and the new bonhomie that is being witnessed in the West Asia. And that is why you might be aware that recently the West Asian Quad was also in the news, which included countries like Israel, UAE, United States of America, and India. So in this large background of the Israel-Palestine issue, which is beyond the scope of this discussion, let us focus on how India's stand towards the Israel-Palestine issue has shaped up in the past. In this line, if you look at this topic from the General Studies Paper 2 point of view, it is important for us in the international relations part. And if you look at the previous year question papers, in the mains examination of 2018, a question was asked that India's relations with Israel have of late acquired a depth and diversity which cannot be rolled back discuss. And you had to write the answer for this question in 10 marks and 150 words. So let us look at how India established its relations with Israel and how the relations of India have shaped up in the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So Israel-Palestine conflict will not be discussed in this video, But essentially, India's stand on the Israel-Palestine conflict and India's relations with Israel will be our focus of discussion in this particular video. Now, if we look at the background of the India-Israel relation, India announced the recognition of Israel on 17 September 1950. However, Israel was created in 1948, and when the Israel was created, India opposed the creation of Israel back in 1948. However, in 1950, finally, India announced the recognition of Israel. However, even after the recognition of the creation of Israel, India did not establish diplomatic relations with Israel for around 42 years. And that is why India established the diplomatic relations with Israel as late as 1992. And since then, the relations between India and Israel have improved considerably. However, one of the important and historic moments was when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Israel in 2017. And from there on, the political relations between India and Israel have improved considerably. And this visit of the Prime Minister of India was the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Israel since its creation in 1948. So this is how the trajectory of India-Israel relations has been. That is, initially India did not recognize or oppose the creation of the state of Israel. After that, we recognized it in 1950 and finally established diplomatic relations as late as 1992. And it was only in 2017 that the Indian Prime Minister became the first Prime Minister to visit Israel since its creation in 1948. Now, whenever we are studying the bilateral relations of India with any other country, our focus should be on first understanding the important areas of cooperation. And accordingly, we are looking at these dimensions in case of India-Israel relations. So if you look at the economic and the commercial relations between India and Israel, because the diplomatic relations were established very late, and since then the relations have improved, the bilateral trade now stands at US dollar 5.65 billion. However, if you look at the year 1992, this trade was only about $200 million. So basically, the trade has improved considerably in the past 30 years. Further, if you look at the importance of economic relations, the balance of trade is in favor of India by US dollar 1.8 billion. Normally, we see that India has had trade deficit with various other countries, including one of the biggest countries in India's neighborhood, that is China, and that is a cause of concern for India's bilateral trade. However, India has a surplus trade with Israel here, which is important. Further, India is Israel's third largest trading partner in Asia and is seventh largest trading partner of Israel globally. This shows the importance that Israel accords to India as well. Further, if you look at the India-Israel relations and the investments between the two countries, the Indian investments in Israel have totaled to about US dollar $122.4 million. Further, there are over 300 investments from Israel into India, and they are into the high-tech domain as well as agriculture. One of the important areas of cooperation is, of course, the agriculture, because if you look at the location of Israel, it is located in the desert area in the West Asia. And in such a location, despite having adverse climatic conditions, the agriculture in Israel has improved considerably because of improvement in technology. And that is why India is also focusing on gaining such technological expertise in the field of agriculture. So India has benefited from Israeli experience and technologies in horticulture mechanization, protected cultivation, orchard, canopy management, nursery management, micro irrigation, and post-harvest management. Further, one of the important areas of cooperation between India and Israel is that of defense. Now, if you look at the location of Israel, it is surrounded by adverse neighborhood and has continuously been at the receiving end of terrorist attacks. And similarly, India is also surrounded by hostile neighbors in the form of Pakistan and China, and we have also had our share of struggle. And that is why the defense or the security related cooperation between the two countries has improved considerably in the past few years. So there are regular exchanges between the armed forces. Further, there is cooperation on security issues, which include a creation of joint working group on counter-terrorism, where Israel is supporting the Indian forces in Jammu and Kashmir. Further, Israel has been among India's top 3 arms supplier for last 5 years. Now, as we all are aware that India is heavily dependent on Russia for its defense imports. And that is why India has been trying to diversify its defense imports, and as such, Israel has emerged as one of the important partners. Further, both have been jointly developing some important defense systems like the Barak 8 air defense system and the MRSAM. Further, as far as science and technology is concerned, both the countries established India-Israel Industrial Research and Development and Innovation Fund. And finally, a contribution of US dollar 20 million has been provided from each side over 5 years, which is playing a very important role in enabling the India and the Israeli enterprises to undertake joint research and development projects. So these are some fronts on which the cooperation between India and Israel has been improving considerably. Now, after this, let us look at how the India-Israel relations play in the backdrop of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, if you look at India's stand on the Israel-Palestine conflict, it has witnessed three stages. Initially, when India also got independence and when Israel was created, India was seen as pro-Palestine because India stood against the colonization, etc. Further, in 1992, when India established diplomatic relations with Israel, India focused on balancing its ties between Israel and Palestine. However, of late, it has been said that India's policy has been that of pro-Israel, or you can say this policy is also called as de-hyphenization. So let us look at all these three stages and how they have unfolded in the recent past. So as we all are aware that Israel was created in the year 1948 according to the UN partition plan, where Israel, a Jewish state, was carved out of the Palestinian territory, which was a British mandate back then. So when Israel was created, India had voted against the creation of Israel. However, in 1950, India formally recognized the creation of Israel. Now, the importance here lies in that India was the only non-Arab state that voted against the UN partition plan of Palestine in the General Assembly. So this was very, very important stand of India back then because India also got its independence from the colonization in 1947. So India voted against the Israel's creation primarily because India had also witnessed partition along the religious lines. And it was the principal stand of India against the colonization and its effects, and also the solidarity with the Palestinian people. Further, India also took this decision based on the consideration of Pakistan's plan to isolate India over Kashmir and India's energy dependency on the Arab countries. So this was also one of the pragmatic stands that India had taken place back in 1948. However, in 1950, India formally recognized Israel. And as we all are aware, full diplomatic relations were established as late as 1992. Now, in this backdrop, let us look at how India's relationship with the Palestinian Liberation Organization have unfolded. It needs to be highlighted here that the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, is seen as a representative of the Palestinian state. So in this regard, in 1967 and 1973 wars, India had lashed out at Israel as an aggressor. That is, India clearly highlighted its stand that it was against any kind of aggression by Israel. Further, in 1975, India became the first non-Arab country to recognize the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the sole representative of the Palestinian people and had also invited it to open an office in Delhi, which was accorded diplomatic status 5 years later. So this was seen as one of the important diplomatic pushes from India towards the Palestinian Liberation Authority and the Palestinian state if it would be created in the near future. Further, in 1998, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization had declared an independent state of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem, India had granted its recognition immediately. And finally, India voted for Palestine to become a full member of the UNESCO in 2011 and also co-sponsored the UN General Assembly resolution that enabled Palestine to become a non-member observer state at the UN without voting rights. Also, India has supported the installation of Palestinian flag on the UN premises in September 2015. Now, all these moves of India towards the Palestine were seen as India's foreign policy being pro-Palestine. However, we are aware that India started balancing its ties between both Israel and Palestine, and accordingly, we established the diplomatic relations back in 1992, and from there on, a progress has been witnessed. So let us look at how this new policy of balancing the ties and de-hyphenization has unfolded between India and Israel, especially in the context of Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, de-hyphenization as a policy should simply be seen as India trying to deal with the Israel and Palestine separately. That is, we are not going to see this issue combinedly. And that is why India has been taking various steps which are seen as pro-Israel, while India has also been taking similar steps in case of the Palestine which are seen as pro-Palestine. That is how we have been balancing, and at the same time we have been de-hyphenating the issue of Israel and Palestine. That is, we are dealing with both these separately so that India's interests can be taken care of. So since 2014, when India's relations with Israel have been improving, India abstained from voting at the UNHRC resolution against Israeli forces and Hamas. So this clearly shows a tilt of India towards Israel. Further, in 2016, again India abstained from a UNHRC resolution against Israel. In 2017, during the visit of Palestinian Liberation Organization chief Mohammed Abbas, the reference to East Jerusalem was missing in the statement that was issued by Indian PM. However, earlier, India had supported the Palestinian statehood with East Jerusalem as its capital. So this again was seen as India tilting towards Israel. Further, we know that in 2018, Prime Minister Modi became the first ever Indian PM to visit Israel. However, one important feature of this visit was that the PM skipped the visit to Palestinian de facto capital of Ramallah. So all these measures can be seen as clear tilting towards Israel. However, it does not mean that India has only been tilting towards Israel and has reduced its relations with Palestine. So, on the issue of Palestine, also, India has been taking important steps, and that is why this policy has been termed as De-Hyphenation Policy. That is, we are dealing with Israel and Palestine separately. Now, back in 2018, the Donald Trump administration had recognized Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. And this was an unprecedented move by the Trump administration. So earlier, all the countries recognized Tel Aviv as the capital and Jerusalem as a disputed territory. However, this move of Trump administration was opposed by India, and this was clearly visible when India had voted in favor of a resolution in the General Assembly which opposed the United States of America's recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. And this move was clearly seen as the policy of de-Hyphenization at play. That is, on the one hand, we were supporting the Israeli cause or issues with Israel, while on the other hand, we are also supporting the cause of Palestine Liberation Organization. Further, at the UNHRC's 46th session in Geneva, India had voted against Israel in 3 important resolutions. One was related to the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people, second was related to Israeli settlement policy, and third on the human rights situation in the Golan Heights in the Middle East. And that is why it has been said that India has been following a policy where it is taking stand on the issues on a case-to-case basis, and it can be said that the policy of de-hyphenization is a work in progress, and similarly, far more things will unfold in the future. However, India has started practicing this policy of de-hyphenization as far as Israel and Palestine are concerned. So this is clearly seen that on the one hand, India had abstained from voting at the UNHRC on a resolution against Israeli forces, while on the other hand, India has also voted against Israel in some of the resolutions. So these are some of the instances how the policy of de-hyphenization has unfolded after 2014. So this is how the India-Israel relations have unfolded in the past. And these are some important parameters on which India-Israel bilateral relations should be understood. Now, after going through this discussion, you can try a practice question from the mains examination perspective. That is, India's Israel policy has come out of the shadow of the Palestinian question. Discuss. With this, let's take up the next news article. This article on page number 6 is related to one of the important social issues that is related to abortion rights of women. In this line, India has a Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, which has been amended in 2021. So in this article, let us try and understand what are the issues associated with unsafe abortion practices. Also, what are the new amendments that have been brought out in the 1970 Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. And after that, we will look at what is the significance of these amendments and still what are the challenges that need to be addressed. Now, abortion means the expulsion of a fetus from the uterus before it has reached a stage of viability. And in human beings, this stage of viability is generally considered as 20th week of gestation period. Now, to understand the issues associated with the abortion, let us try and understand what exactly does the data say. So, there are different data that have been published by World Health Organization, the National Family Health Survey of India, Lancet report of 2018, and different journals. So, accordingly, the World Health Organization related data says that 6 out of the 10 of all the unintended pregnancies finally end in an induced abortion. And around 45% of all these abortions are unsafe. And of all these unsafe abortions, 97% take place in developing countries, and India being one of the developing countries, this is a cause of concern. Further, the National Family Health Survey of 2019 and 2021 highlighted that 3% of all the pregnancies in India result in abortion. And more than a quarter of abortions, that is 27%, are performed by women themselves at home. However, this is not considered to be a safe practice in the absence of medical practitioners. Further, the Lancet report of 2018 says that 73% of all the abortions in India in 2015 were medication abortions. That is, they did not require any surgical procedure. And another 5% of all the abortions were outside of the health facilities with methods other than the medication abortion, and these were a cause of concern. Further, regarding the issues associated with unsafe medical abortion, the abortions account for about 10% of the maternal deaths in India, and an estimated 6.8 million fewer female births will be recorded across India by 2030 because of persistent use of selective abortions. So clearly, this is some data related to the issue of abortion in India, which can be used in answers in the mains examination. So after this, let us look at what are the physical health risks that are associated with an unsafe abortion. So first in this line is the incomplete abortion. And this basically highlights the failure to remove or expel all the pregnancy tissues from the uterus. Second is heavy bleeding or hemorrhage in the uterine area. And third is infection, which can take place in case of unsafe practices or unsafe medical practices outside the recognized medical practitioners. Then this can lead to uterine perforation, and it can also lead to damage to the genital tract and internal organs as a consequence of inserting dangerous objects into vagina or anus. So these are certain physical health risks that are associated with unsafe abortions, and that is why this practice of unsafe abortion needs to be checked. And that is why we have the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act that was first formulated in 1970 and then it was amended in 2021. Let us look at the features of these two acts. So now if you compare the provisions of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 and the amendments that have been brought out in the year 2021, the first issue here is that who can go for medical abortion of pregnancy in case of contraceptive failure. Now, in case of contraceptive failure, earlier, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 recognized that only married women could get their pregnancy terminated medically. However, the 2021 amendments have now included unmarried women also, removing the stigma related to pregnancy of the unmarried women. The second is related to the revision of gestation age limit. Now, normally it is considered that abortion is safe till 20th week of gestation. However, the new Amendment Act provides that it can go till 24 weeks for rape survivor, and beyond that, it can go for 24 weeks for substantial fetal abnormalities. Further, who can suggest the medical termination of pregnancy? So, in that case, opinion of the registered medical practitioners is important. So, in the 1971 Act, it was provided that for medical termination of pregnancy till 12 weeks, only one registered medical practitioner's opinion is required. And for pregnancy termination till 20th weeks, there was requirement of opinion of two registered medical practitioners, that is 2 RMP. However, this has now been changed, and in the 2021 Act, the opinion of only one registered medical practitioner is required for termination of pregnancy till 20 weeks. However, till 24 weeks, the opinion of two registered medical practitioners is required. And beyond 24 weeks, a medical board will have to be constituted who will consider the case of medical termination of pregnancy. Further, in case of breach of confidentiality, earlier there was punishment of up to rupees 1000. And now such breach of confidentiality shall be punishable with imprisonment, which may extend to 1 year or fine or with both. So these are certain changes that have been brought about in the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 on these fronts, which include gestation age limit, the opinion required by the registered medical practitioners, and also who can get the pregnancy aborted. In this case, let us look at what are certain benefits and what are certain challenges that still remain. So if you look at the benefits that are going to accrue because of the new amendments that have been brought about, it expands the access of women to safe and legal abortion services. We are aware that even the unmarried women can now seek medical abortion of their pregnancy. So the scope has been expanded. Secondly, the proposed increase in the gestational age will ensure dignity, autonomy, and confidentiality as well as justice for women. Further, the amendments will provide legal protection to the medical practitioners who otherwise would be penalized under the Indian Penal Code for induced miscarriage. Fourthly, it will contribute towards ending preventable maternal mortality to help meet the Sustainable Development Goals, which aims at reducing the maternal mortality considerably. However, despite the changes that have been brought out in the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 2021, there are certain challenges that still remain. First is that the decision of abortion solely rests on the registered medical practitioner's opinion, and it fails to recognize the right of the women to decide the abortion of the pregnancy. So this stands as one of the challenges, that the opinion of registered medical practitioner is final and not that of the women. So here the right of the women has not been recognized. Secondly, the act only mentions pregnant women and does not recognize transgenders and others who do not identify themselves as women. Thirdly, the mandatory reporting under the POCSO Act 2012 against child sexual offences impacts privacy and hinders the access of adolescents to safe abortion services. And finally, persistent continuation of illegal practice of sex determination leads to unsafe abortion practices and female feticides, which go unaddressed in the MTP Amendment Act of 2021. So these are certain benefits as well as certain challenges that still need to be addressed related to the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act of 2021. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 7 highlights a very important issue which is known as export of embedded carbon and embedded natural resources like water. In this line, this article highlights that the exports of the developing countries have been increasing. However, these exports are coming at the cost of increased carbon emissions and unsustainable use of natural resources like water. In this line, if you look at the previous year question papers in the prelims examination, a question was asked in 2019. This question was that among the following, which one is the largest exporter of rice in the world in last 5 years? So in this case, the answer was India, because India has emerged as the largest exporter of rice in the world in the past 5 years. However, as we are aware that rice is one of the water intensive crops that is grown in India. And that is why such increased exports highlighted the issue of overutilization of the limited resource that is water. And that is why it was a cause of concern, and accordingly, a question was asked by UPSC in the prelims examination of 2019. So similarly, let us try and understand what is this issue associated with embedded carbon and embedded water, etc. Now, in this line, we are aware that the countries have been divided into developed and developing countries based on the size of their economy. Now, of late, we are seeing that there has been an increasing trend of increasing exports from the developing countries into the developed countries, where the largest beneficiaries of such exports are India, China, etc. However, these exports are coming at the cost of increased carbon emissions, and these carbon emissions are taking place in the developing countries. Now, this is an issue because the developed countries have stringent environmental laws, and accordingly, the compliance with these laws is very difficult. So, what happens is that countries choose to move to developing countries to create such products, and from there on, these countries export these products into developed countries. Now, what happens is that in developing countries, the environmental laws are not that strict, and that is why these companies exploit these weak environmental laws and do the manufacturing there. Now, the developing countries benefit from it because of the increased exports. However, these exports come at the cost of increased carbon emissions and overutilization of natural resources like water. So, this is one of the issues that has been highlighted in this article. So, let us understand this issue of what is embedded carbon and what is the issue associated with it, and which all countries are the beneficiaries and which are at the receiving end of such embedded carbon emissions. So in this line, the embodied carbon is simply, it is the carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gas emission associated with the manufacture and use of a product or service. Now let's say India is producing any product P for exports into the developed countries. And for the production of this product, India's companies are emitting greenhouse gases. So in case of export of this product P, India has emitted considerable amounts of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions, and that is known as embodied carbon. That is, you are exporting carbon which is being emitted in India. Now, the main issue here is that most developed countries are the net importers of the polluted goods which are produced elsewhere, especially in the developing countries, as we have understood. And the largest net importers of carbon emission intensive goods are the US, Japan, and Germany, because all these countries have stringent environmental laws, and as such, the companies are moving out of these countries into developing countries where the environmental laws are less strict. And from there on, these are exporting products into Japan, US, and Germany. So the US net carbon imports increased from 262.3 million tons in 1995 to about 834.1 million tons in 2018. That is almost 4 times in the last 25 years. Further, the OECD member countries which are developed are also net importers of carbon emissions. Now, this is largely happening because of stringent environmental measures that have been adopted by the developed countries. And as such, pollution-intensive industries show a tendency to relocate from the developed countries to the developing countries with the lowest environmental standards or weak enforcement of environmental standards. And this process has been termed by researchers as the pollution haven hypothesis. Further, the developing countries that are relaxed in enforcing the environmental policies eventually become the pollution havens. So, the countries which are focusing on manufacturing without adhering to strict environmental clearances are facing the issue of pollution and have become pollution havens. In this case, the developing countries, including India, has also become one of the havens of pollution. Now, if you look at the trends of such kind of exports and imports, India is one of the leading exporters of carbon emissions or carbon embodied products. Further, China is the largest exporter of such carbon embodied products, followed by US, Russia, and India. In this line, India's total carbon emission exports increased from about 80 million tons at the time of joining World Trade Organization in 1995 to 426 million tons in 2018. That is, it has increased 5 times. Further, in the recent past, India's export performance has been attributed to petroleum products, electronics, and chemicals. However, the carbon emissions that are embodied in all these export products have been increasing steadily over the past years. Similar is the issue of water exports, and India is the leading exporter of rice in the world market, as we are aware. And rice, which is a water-intensive crop, India is indirectly exporting the water to the other countries, and this is a cause of concern because this kind of process is not sustainable in the long term. And further, this virtual water trade will have an adverse impact on the long-term sustainability and the food security of our country. Further, the agriculture water withdrawal as a percentage of total available renewable water resource has increased from about 26% in 1993 to 36% in 2022. And the total per capita renewable water resource has declined from 1909 cubic meters to 1412 cubic meters during this period. So that is why it is a cause of concern. And as you are aware, a question was asked in the prelims of 2019 related to this concept of water exports. So similarly, you can expect a question related to embodied carbon emissions kind of thing. With this, let's take up the next news article. This article on page number 8 is related to the US-Taiwan relations. Now, this has come into news because of the recent statement by the President of United States of America. In the recent statement at the Quad Group meeting, the President of US, Joe Biden, had said that if China attacks Taiwan, US would defend Taiwan militarily. However, we are aware that in case of Ukraine, despite assurances by the United States of America against Russia, the US did not intervene on the side of the Ukraine against Russia. And that is why this statement of Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America, has issued considerable debate that in case of attack by China, the US will come to the rescue of Taiwan militarily and will involve itself militarily. However, after this statement was given out, the US administration has clarified that it does not have any intention to involve itself militarily in case of the Taiwan conflict. Now, the US-Taiwan relations are important to understand the larger geopolitical issues that are happening around us. However, they are not so important for us from the exam perspective. What is important for us from the exam perspective are the India-Taiwan relations and the One China policy that India has been following. So let us revise from our previous DNS video as to what are the stakes in the India-Taiwan relations and what is the current status of the diplomatic relations between India and Taiwan. And there were calls that India should give up its One China policy when the China attacked in the Galwan region of Ladakh. So let us revise from the previous DNS video. Now this article on page number 9 is related to India-Taiwan relations. And this issue has gained currency in the backdrop of the recent problems between India and China, especially along the borders in the Ladakh region. And it has been argued by various experts that India should leverage its relations with India and Taiwan to counter the increasing Chinese assertion. Now the issue here is that India has till date been following or has officially followed the One China policy or One China principle. And under this One China principle, India officially recognizes Tibet and Taiwan to be part of China. And as such, India till now does not have any diplomatic relations with the Taiwan. However, India's relations with Taiwan have improved continuously, and that is why it has been argued that India should leverage its position with Taiwan in order to check the Chinese assertion towards India. So in this article, we will look at the key arguments in favor of reconsidering India's One China policy or the One China principle. Now, as you can see in this map, this is in the Chinese main territory, and this is known as the People's Republic of China. However, Taiwan claims itself to be the Republic of China. So the question then arises, should India move away from its One China policy? So first we will have to understand what is this One China policy and what has been India's stand on this. Now, One China policy is a position which was enforced by the Communist Party of China that presently rules China. Now, between 1945 to 1949, a civil war and a power struggle started in China between the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang Party, which was ruling China at that point of time. However, the Communist Party of China under Mao Zedong came out to be winner, and it pushed out the ruling Kuomintang Party to the island known as Formosa, which is presently known as Taiwan. And when the Communist Party of China occupied the main Chinese territory, it came up with this policy of One China policy. And under this One China policy, the Communist Party staked claim on a much bigger territory than which was under its control at that time. And this bigger territory included the mainland China besides Tibet and Taiwan. So China occupied Tibet by 1950 and consolidated its military stranglehold on the region throughout the decade. Further, it has been aiming to capture Taiwan since then, but in the face of global opposition, China has not carried out its designs across the Formosa Strait in the South China Sea to capture the Taiwanese territory. Now, as far as India is concerned, India was amongst the first countries to recognize the communist rule in China. And through the 1954 Sino-Indian Trade Agreement, India acknowledged Chinese control of Tibet. And this was when India officially recognized the One China policy. But there was a war between India and China in the 1960s, and after that, India has not clearly stated its stance as far as the One China policy is concerned. However, in 2003, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the president, he signed a joint declaration with his Chinese counterpart. And this declaration recognized that Tibet Autonomous Region is the part of the territory of People's Republic of China. That is, it was reiteration of India's principle of One China policy. So in this background, let us look at how India-Taiwan relations have unfolded in the past. So first thing to be learned here is that India and Taiwan do not have any official diplomatic relations. And India currently only recognizes the People's Republic of China, that is mainland China, and not the Republic of China's claim of being the legitimate government of mainland China, Hong Kong and Macau. Now, although India has been officially supporting the One China policy and does not have any official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, Taiwan views India's rising geopolitical standing as a counterbalance to the People's Republic of China's dominance in the region. Also, as a part of its Look East foreign policy, India has sought to cultivate extensive ties with Taiwan in terms of trade, investment, and cultural ties. In this background, the India-Taipei Association was established in Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan, in 1995 to promote non-governmental interactions between India and China. And this is because India does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and accordingly, India is promoting the non-governmental interactions between India and Taiwan. In 2002, both the countries signed the bilateral investment promotion and protection agreement. And as of 2019, the trade between India and Taiwan was booming and is around US $7 billion and is also growing at a rate of 20% year on year. Major Taiwanese exports to India include the integrated circuits, machinery, and other electronic products. And India is also keen to attract the Taiwanese investment, particularly in high technology and labor intensive industries. And more than 80 Taiwanese companies and entities currently have a presence in India. So, this gives us a brief idea of how India Taiwan relations have unfolded and what is the current situation of the India Taiwan relations. Now, although India does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, it has been changing its stance on the One China policy. And this was clearly seen in May 2020 when two members of the Indian Parliament virtually attended the newly elected President Tsai's swearing in ceremony and had praised Taiwanese democracy. And this was seen as a warning message to China and signaled a strengthening of relations between India and Taiwan. In July 2020, the Indian government appointed a top career diplomat, Joint Secretary Gurung Lal Das, the former head of the US division in India's Ministry of External Affairs, as its new envoy to Taiwan. Another issue came up in October. On 10th October, the Taiwanese National Day is celebrated. And ahead of this Taiwanese National Day, the Chinese embassy in India had penned a letter to Indian media houses asking them to adhere to the Indian government's One China policy. And this was because earlier an advertisement in Indian print media carried an image of the Taiwanese president with the slogan that Taiwan and India are natural partners. And this had irked the Chinese government, and accordingly it clarified in this particular statement. Now, the response of India was that the External Affairs Ministry brushed away the Chinese criticism by simply saying that Indian media is free to carry out what they want. And the significant thing here was that the Ministry of External Affairs did not reiterate India's One China policy. So this was a clear indication that India has been changing its stance, and this was clearly visible in the events that unfolded in 2020. So now, what are the arguments for reconsidering One China policy? First is that China itself has never followed the One India policy. And back in 2014, the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj had said that although India adheres to the One China policy, but China should also adhere to One India policy. That is, China should also respect India's territorial integrity and should stop staking claim in the Ladakh region and in the Arunachal Pradesh. Now, recently China had announced that it does not accept Ladakh as a union territory and ignored India's objections to construct roads through the disputed Gilgit-Baltistan region. Further, China has been diplomatically censuring India whenever there are visits by Indian leaders or foreign diplomats to Arunachal Pradesh. Also, China has been blocking foreign funding for the developmental projects that are going on in Arunachal Pradesh and claiming Arunachal Pradesh to be a disputed territory. Also, China has supported insurgencies in the northeastern region. And these are the arguments in favor of reconsideration of India's One China policy. That is, India should reconsider its One China policy and also use to its advantage its relations with territories like Taiwan to check the Chinese assertiveness. So these are few points related to One China policy. and they can be used in writing answers related to India-China relations, and especially India's improving relations with Taiwan can be quoted while writing answers related to India-China relations. With this, let's take up the next news article now. With this, we conclude today's discussion, and this is the question for the day.